Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar this afternoon. My name is Judy Brous, and I'm the Executive Director of NAAEE, and I'm really thrilled you could all join us. And today we have a very special presenter, Kristen Grimm, who will be talking about messages and master narratives, and I'll introduce her in just a minute. And if you've never heard Kristen, you're truly in for a big treat. So I'm so excited she could join us today. I also want to thank all our affiliate co-hosts, and I see several of them on the lineup. We're working with all our affiliates to help sponsor these monthly webinar series, and we're really thrilled to have that partnership. And I hope that many of you are from some of the states that are co-sponsoring with us. Through our monthly webinar series, we are really trying to highlight new ideas and thinking in the field. We're also trying to showcase amazing leaders who are working both in environmental education and other related fields. And we want to improve practice and quality in our field. So we really have had some terrific speakers who are really helping us all think about what we're doing. If any of you have ideas for speakers and topics, just let us know. You can send us an email anytime. That would be great. And so today what we're going to do is a quick introduction about how to use the Click webinar platform. Then Kristen will be presenting and go through her presentation. We'll take questions at the end and a few closing reminders, like today is the last day to register for the NAAEE conference and get the early bird registration, just saying that up front. So let me start quickly with Click webinar. Many of you have used this before, but hopefully you all can hear me and you can all see the screen. If not, let us know. But you can either connect through the phone or the computer. But when we show videos, if you are on the phone, you're going to need to unmute or mute your computer. And then when the videos are showing, you need to turn the sound up or you won't be able to hear the videos. There'll be feedback if you're on the phone and the computer. So when the videos play, turn up your sound. When the videos are done, turn off your sound on your computer. And we have you all muted so that there's no background noise, okay? And you can always be using the chat box at the bottom of the screen. For questions or concerns, just write a message in and send it, and we'll be watching that. You can also click on the smiling face icon to leave us a little message, but it's easier, just write us a note, and we're going to be tracking that. Okay? And then immediately following, we'll have questions and answers, and if we don't get to all of them, we will try and answer your questions on ECentral, on EE Pro, and that'll give us a chance to get as far as we can, but if we can't answer them all, you'll still get an answer to your questions. Okay? And I also want to thank Kristen Kunkel, who is our EE specialist. And Kristen has been fantastic on all aspects of getting the webinar series up and running. And when I get freaked out that the technology isn't working, Kristen is very calm and collected. And I did have a photo of Kristen, but the animation isn't working. So this is not what Kristen actually looks like, just in case you wanted to know. Okay, now for the best part of the webinar. I am now thrilled to introduce our speaker today, Kristen Grimm. She is absolutely one of the most talented people I've had the pleasure of working with. She's a guru of strategic communications and has run some of the most successful social marketing campaigns out there. Kristen is the founder and president of Spitfire Strategies, which is one of the country's leading public relations firms. Spitfire works exclusively with nonprofits and foundations to help them develop communications and campaigns that better educate their audiences, raise awareness and resources, and inspire people to get involved. She's all about using communication to make the world a better place. She has helped hundreds of nonprofits develop strategies that spur action around some of today's most pressing problems and inspire more people to get involved. And she's really helped NAAEE in the last 5 years in amazing ways. Kristen has reformed, reframed, and reimagined critical issues ranging from restoring the Gulf of Mexico after the BP oil spill to protecting Americans' online privacy rights to making sure all kids have access to a good education, nutritious food, and quality health care. Kristen also trains a lot of people, and I'm included in that. She enjoys teaching others the tricks of her trade and helping them reach those aha moments that make their communication and campaign efforts more successful. She has a lot of clients like the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Brookings Institute, and many, many more. And she's developed a number of resources that I hope she'll talk about, including the SMART chart, discovering the activation point, and Just Enough Planning Guide. And she is so great at creating messages and master narratives that resonate. And the other thing about Kristen is she thinks so quickly on her feet, it's amazing. Prior to launching Spitfire, Kristen worked as a fellow at the Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation. She was the president and chief operating officer of Fenton Communications, where she wrote Now Hear This, the 9 Laws of Successful Advocacy Communications. She also serves on a number of boards and has been a friend to NAAEE and so many of us working in environmental education. We're so lucky to have her here to help us think more about communication, so let's give a warm virtual welcome to Kristen.
Thanks, Judy. It's great to talk to everybody on the phone today. I wanted to walk through thinking about strategic communications and what some major things are to keep in mind. A number of you asked some questions in advance, particularly wondering how, if you're a smaller entity or nonprofit, how do you really think through strategic communications? And that's a great question. So this is really for any size organization. If you want to think and align your communications to help you achieve what you want to achieve, that's what I'm basically going to talk about today. And then I will open it up, lingering communication questions on any topic that you would like. So let's get started with the very first thing on the next slide that we want to think about. And that's communication should have a purpose. It should have a really clear purpose. And sometimes you might have several purposes. Let's take a look at this video, and then we'll talk about the purpose of this video and how you can apply thinking about purpose to your own communication efforts.
Welcome home, buddy.
You and me, we were made for love. A lifetime is not long enough to show you what you mean to me. Ooh, I'll be waiting here for you when you come home to me.
I'll see you later, buddy. Sorry. I decided I shouldn't drive home last night. I stayed at Dave's.
Ooh, when you come home,
I'm back. I'm back.
To me.
Yeah, I'm back.
All right, so I know a number of there in the middle of that were like, oh my God, very upset about what was about to happen to that dog. So this is an interesting communications because it actually has several purposes, right? They obviously have a behavior change in mind. They don't want people to drink and drive. And they also want to really give people, remind them that they have a reason, not just themselves, because sometimes we just think about, well, whatever, it's just me, but really reminding them of the various different people that rely on you. And especially here with the younger audience that may not have other family members, that they're really trying to find an emotional connection so that when they're having to make this very important decision, that this would stick with them, that they've now actually internalized this decision and what it means in their life. And that is the purpose of this communication. And so when you all are thinking about using communications, it's really important that you know that. I'm trying to get this behavior change. I'm trying to get people to do this. I'm trying to get people to not do this. And also, if you have some of those underlying purposes, like I need to make this emotionally resonant with them. I need to make it relevant to their life. This can also be a purpose of your communication. So a lot of times when I look at people's communication, like if I go and look at your Twitter feed, or if I go and look at a poster that you've put up for a family event to get folks to come out and do something around environmental education in the community, I should actually be able to clearly see what your purpose is. And it shouldn't just be communications for the sake of communications. So let's go to the next slide. The second thing that I want everybody to really focus on is what are your actual communication challenges? So a lot of times people focus a lot on information as opposed to persuasion. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is that you're actually usually trying to persuade people to do something. You know, if you want people to actually turn off that water when they're brushing their teeth, you're going to have to persuade them to do that because it's habit, and that's why they do it, is it's habit. It's not that they're bad people. It's not that they don't like water. It's just a habit. So you're going to have to think about, how am I going to interrupt that habit? So it's really important to understand, why aren't people doing what we want them to do now? Why aren't more teachers teaching environmental education in the classroom? Why aren't more communities using environmental education as a way to build a sustainable society? When you ask those questions, it will identify what your communication challenges are. So here we're going to look at a video, and there's a clear communication challenge, which is that there are a number of parents, and doctors are now reporting that more and more parents, they're seeing more and more parents coming into their offices who are talking about issues around vaccines. And so they have a big communication challenge, right, which is that people are starting to question whether vaccines are good or bad. And so Jimmy Kimmel actually put together a PSA. So let's take a look.
I am a doctor.
I'm a doctor.
I'm a doctor.
I'm a doctor.
And I believe in vaccinations.
And I believe in vaccinations.
If you don't vaccinate your kids, it can endanger their lives.
The potential downsides of vaccinations are almost non-existent.
The cumulative scientific and medical communities are in absolute full agreement
that there is basically no reason not to vaccinate your kids.
No reason.
Which is why I cannot believe we have to make this PSA.
I thought we settled this in the 50s.
Hey, remember that time you got polio? No, you don't, because your parents got you vaccinated.
I did 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school,
and 3 years of pediatric residency.
I had to go to school for 8 years.
I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about.
But you people still won't listen.
Now I have to use my only day off to talk to you idiots about vaccines?
I want to finish watching Breaking Bad.
I'm only halfway through the second season.
But instead, I've got to come here
because you listened to some moron who read a forwarded email.
Perfect.
All these people had to set up cameras, lights, sound equipment, so that I could tell you to do something we've been doing for a century. Look at all these people.
This is stupid.
Get your kids vaccinated.
Get your kids vaccinated.
Get your kids vaccinated.
Get your kids vaccinated or lose my number.
Get your kids vaccinated, or these doctors may never find out that Walt dies at the end of Breaking Bad.
Are you kidding me, dude?
Paid for by professionals who know what the hell they're talking about.
Thank you, doctors. I am.
All right. So here they're trying to take a funny look at an issue, and they're trying to use real doctors and use satire, which is an interesting way to go about it. Now, we're not entirely sure if this is going to work for parents who might be inching over on the edge of not vaccinating. Probably it's definitely not going to work with people who truly don't vaccines. But it might help that kind of mushy middle if they're traveling in that direction, that they're trying to use this. And the most important thing, though, I would say is that they're trying something different. You know, they're not just trying just the facts. They're not just doing a fact with a faceless person in a newspaper article. They really are trying something different here to make sure that people understand how important it is to vaccinate your kids. So what I'd encourage you to think about is, what are your communication challenges? Because your communication strategies and tactics should actually help you achieve your purpose, and it should help you overcome these challenges, which is why everybody's not already doing it the way we want them to do it anyways. So let's move to the next slide and talk a little bit about influence. So as I mentioned before, it's really important to keep in mind that for most of you, what you're trying to do is persuade people, not manipulate people, just persuade them in their own good interest to do something. A lot of times when I look at people's communication strategies, it's here, it's the straight line on the left. And in fact, most of us make our decisions in a much messier fashion, like the squiggly line on the right. And it's basically on almost anything that we're thinking about doing. Like, I was talking to a parent recently about, you know, why their kid should be part of a walking school bus. And it was just fascinating to hear the machinations going on about how they were going to make that decision. Because you would kind of think, like, are we within walking distance of school? Should my kid get exercise? These seem pretty straightforward. But instead, the conversation became all about, well, did they have time? What was going to happen in the inclement weather? You know, were they going to have to, their schedule was going to be dictated by other kids? What if the kids were late? You know, and so it was this whole rigmarole of really having to understand all of the different things that they were thinking through to get to that decision to allow their kid to go onto this walking school bus. So it's a lot more complicated, But if you can actually think about the audiences you're trying to successfully engage with, and you think about, well, what is that decision-making process that they go through, and what points of information, and what things convince them that it's worth it to maybe have less control of your schedule than in your individual car? What do you have to emphasize, and who do they need to hear that from? And so it's really important to think about what is that influence strategy that you think is going to work. Because at the end of the day, if we go to the next slide, this is one of the scariest statistics I've seen in recent years. You know, people have talked about that basically all of our problems could probably be solved by reports that are on the World Bank website. But the truth is that literally a third of these reports have never been read by anyone. And so that just says a lot about, for those of you that are like, I'm going to get out more information about this. I'm going to get out more information about how important it is for kids to get outside and exercise. Instead of thinking, you know what, it really is about they have more control over their schedule when they're in their own car than when they're trying to coordinate with 30 other kids on a walking school bus. So actually, my communications is going to have to be about that challenge and not about continuing to talk about exercise, because that's not necessarily going to be the information that gets them to do what we're interested in having them do. So let's move forward to the next slide. We'll take a look at this video. So generally, we should be able to see, well, what are you doing to get people to do what you're asking them to do? So in this case, we have a lot of moms. This group is interested in having these moms call Kroger's and other grocery stores and actually ask them to not have guns in their store, all right? And so again, they could be showing, you know, terrible scenes of gun violence. They can be doing a lot of different things to try and get the moms to pick up the phone, knowing that these moms are busy and other things. So this is basically their communication influence strategy. Let's take a look at the video.
You can't be skateboarding in here.
Excuse me, ma'am. You can't have that in here. I'm sorry.
What's the problem? He's a kid with a water gun.
Yeah, there's going to be water on the floor, okay? It's a safety hazard. We're just trying to protect our customers.
I'm sorry, like we have food here. We can't have the dog in here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to head right out.
I know, but it's a health hazard.
You can't be in here with that. Someone could get hurt.
Really?
Yes, really.
Cool.
I know, that's why I picked up food.
All right. So what's interesting there is that we can see that there's a really strong influence strategy, and it's not just them talking about the dangers of guns. And if they were to just bring up guns and start to talk about guns and the challenges with guns, they would likely actually trigger a lot of these moms who have feelings about the Second Amendment, and suddenly you're in the gun debate, and you may not want to be in the gun debate. So instead, they're really trying to lead you through a different thought process. They're trying to say, you know what, there's a lot of things that we don't have in grocery stores for a lot of good different reasons. So doesn't this belong in this category? And again, I'm sure we could all play around with this video and talk about what we do or don't like about it. But the point is they have a really strong influence strategy that they think is going to work. And in fact, it did work to generate a lot of actions from moms. And so this is the kind of thing that you all need to think about. So you all have some of these conversations now too, right? Sometimes when I'm working on environmental education in the classroom and we're trying to bring in environmental ed, and people will start to say, well, it's not as important as English and math. So already we're not having a good conversation because it's seen as competitive. So then the question is, well, can I develop an influence strategy? Can I develop a way to have the communication and start the conversation where immediately environmental education is considered more complementary and that I don't trigger this competitive sense that we're basically saying, you know, there's a scarcity thing and I'm triggering all of that. So it's really important for everybody on the phone as you all think about communicating about your issues and engaging people authentically in your issues is what is your influence strategy? What's a way to have the conversation so it doesn't end up in places that's not that helpful or ends up getting decisions that are not right decisions that you would like to see made, but is really going to help you to get where you want to go. Like in this instance, getting moms really active on this issue about what is and is not going to be allowed in the grocery store. So let's take a look at the next slide. You can tell that all of this really suggests knowing your audience. So you hear about this a lot. You need to know who they are, and that's absolutely true. You know, This is an emoji that is meant for a very young generation. So for those of you that are in the younger generation, you're probably like, yeah, I totally know what that says. And for some of you, you're like, I have no idea. And that's sort of the point about audiences, is we need to not only just know who they are. So a lot of times when I talk to groups, they'll say like, oh, okay, well, these are the different segments I'm trying to work with. And that is music to my ears, because I like that they've already thought about different segments. You know, teachers are different than parents. Parents are different whether it's the mom or the dad, and it's different if you're in an urban area or in a rural area. So trying to think, though, too, about how much do you know about your audience, not only who they are demographically, but how do they behave? What are their priorities? You know, how do they make decisions? Because when you really know your audience, you're really able to be communicating with them in a way that is successful, that is engaging and not annoying. And you can figure out things like this, like, does an emoji work or does an emoji not work? I don't know if anybody paid attention, but a couple weeks ago, Hillary Clinton sent out to a bunch of young people and asked, you know, please tell me about student debt in 3 emojis and how you feel about it. And basically, they completely denied her, you know, trying to sum up their experience with student debt with emojis. I think they felt it was a little, you know, just not significant enough. But on top of it, they felt like she was acting like she was hipper than she was. So you also need to figure out, how are you going to reach your audiences, not just by speaking their language, but also like finding a legitimate connection. Because at the end of the day, especially when you're working on the public interest, you know, what you really want to do is have a very trusting, authentic relationship with your audiences, right? Again, we're not manipulating them. We're not just trying to like market them things. We're really, you know, trying to build a better world, and we have some specific ways that we're interested in having them join us. But that's an invitation to join us, and it means really knowing about them and respecting them a lot. So let's take a look at the next slide. And it really means trying to figure out what your audiences care about. And at the end of the day, you need to find where you have common ground. You care about something and they care about something. I was struck by this communication because I was working on water issues, and, you know, we're regularly talking about hogs and chickens and the runoff, and if it's not controlled, it can really lead to some really awful things. But what I found fascinating down in the Carolinas was that that didn't really get them that upset, the hogs, but when they were foreign-owned hogs, that's really what got them upset. So I found that sort of fascinating, that that was the activation point here. But I want to put a flag on stuff like this, because I think sometimes you can do this and it's clever and interesting in a way to engage. I also work on immigration and other issues like that, and so in that case, I would look at something like this and say, yeah, that might activate this audience in the short term, but we got to pay attention to what are some of these master narratives we're laying down. So for me personally, I don't really want to be laying down any master narratives about foreigners not being good. Like, that's not going to be a great place for me to be on a number of issues that I work on. So while we're thinking about, yeah, I totally need to connect with my audience, I just want to put out a cautionary tale that you want to be careful that, you know, you're not doing something you don't mean to do. So sometimes, again, in the educational setting, we talk about, well, when kids do this, there's a high return on investment. And while on the one hand, those short-term economic arguments can actually make that issue gain more traction, particularly among policymaker audiences, the truth of the matter is that sometimes those same arguments actually commodify students, and that may not be what you want to do. So you need to sort of think about, what exactly strategically am I doing here, and let me think about what the consequences of those are over the longer term. Let's take a look at the next slide. So once you sort of know, okay, I have this purpose, and I know my communication challenges, and I know who my audiences are, and I've got a sense of how I might be able to influence them, then you need to really think about, okay, so where are they on the activation scale? And activation basically says, I'm going to share knowledge, I'm going to build will, and I'm going to reinforce action. And it happens generally in those stages. And sometimes that happens super quick, and we actually saw it happen super quick in the last 45 days, right? This EpiPen got so much attention. So, you know, you had some concerned parents. They took to social media. They got it up to the very highest rungs of the Senate and started getting serious pressure on a CEO who happened to be a senator's daughter. And then with basically in a very short period of time, they have gotten a drug price dropped, and they have gotten significant oversight on just drug prices overall by the U.S. Congress, which is, you know, no small feat. Now, a lot of times it doesn't actually happen that fast. So we need to think about, you know, how are we going to move through these? But when you're sharing knowledge, you're really saying to them, hey, I need to make sure this audience knows, cares, and believes. Let's take a look at the next slide. And then the second thing we need to do is make sure that when we're building their will, we're overcoming their barriers. Like, why aren't they taking action now? So one big barrier we've seen recently with issues like guns and other things is that a lot of times these problems are really big. Like, climate change is really big, and people don't really know what they can do. So let's take a look at this video to see how they are trying to find a creative way to get people involved in this issue.
You know, when Columbine happened, a lot of people said, well, this ought to really change things in America and how we view our gun laws. And it's been very frustrating. 15 years later, and we've not seen any change at the national level.
I just was numb. It just seemed so beyond like a dream. And I was like, what do you mean Brichelle is dead, shot?
I'm covered in blood. We've done everything we can do, and someone has to go tell the family. So they are sitting in a waiting room. And then I know how this works, so I steel myself for this, because I know that when I walk into the room and I say that horrible word, I'm going to snatch all of the light and all of the hope and all of the air from that parent's life. There is a lot of profit to be made for all of this sorrow, all of this death, and all of this destruction. Ultimately, it is all about the money.
I don't want to even have to wonder about that, and I surely do not want that on my conscience.
That would mean that I contributed to the death of my nephew.
I feel like I'm supporting all the bad things that are on this wall. I don't want to be part of that.
I don't want anybody to think there's something that they cannot do. There is something they can do, very simply.
They're making money off the backs of dead people. I just can't tolerate it, and I won't let my money support it.
All right, I think we get the gist of this one. So this is important for a couple of different reasons when you think about their readiness level. So in a lot of ways, we know that this is obviously going to audiences that are already probably concerned about gun violence. So we're not talking about the people who are arguing about the Second Amendment. We're talking about people who truly would like there to be a difference, but they don't know what they can personally do about it. So they have found a way to make this very personally relevant to everybody, and they're giving you a very specific action that you can take. And that's generally an important thing when you are trying to engage people in communications, either because you're trying to do behavior change or you're trying to do advocacy change, is to actually get them onto a ladder of engagement where they will start to do things. A lot of times when you look at communication efforts, sometimes people have what I call the large leap. And that's really where they're asking people to take too high risk of an action right out of the gate. And that can be all sorts of things. You know, it could be signing your kid up to go to a green school versus just first having them be exposed to a little more environmental education in their classroom. Like, changing schools is a really big thing. So want to think about, well, what is that ladder of engagement? So you start to see that here, where they're trying to remind people about their emotional connection to this issue, and then they're trying to make it personal, that they actually may be supporting this. And that there's something that they can immediately do about it, and they go on to tell us what that is. So let's take a look at the next. So this brings us to thinking about messaging, and once you sort of know what you are hoping you can get people to do, is to think about, well, how are you framing this up? And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, which is just like this cartoon shows, that basically what grounds you have your conversation often dictates how the conversation is going to go. And you all sort of know that in your personal lives. You know, if you sort of start out with your partner in start talking about you, they might start talking about them, and pretty soon you're in a big fat argument. So you need to think about, well, on what grounds are we having this conversation? So let's take a look at the next slide, which everybody's really familiar with, but this is a great way to frame up this conversation. It wasn't just the outdoors for the sake of the outdoors. They actually framed this up with nature deficit disorder. And that, of course, suggests that it's an illness and that somebody is sick. And, of course, then we have an automatic thing, which is what is the cure? So that's a really different conversation than just sort of what are the benefits of kids having outdoor education. So how this is framed up generally gave this a sense of importance and priority that might not have been there otherwise if it was just sort of a nice to have, kids should get to play outdoors a bit. Let's take a look at the next one. And when you frame up something really well, it helps you to message well. We were having a lot of conversations down in Georgia about making sure that everybody has access to healthy and affordable foods. And one thing we knew was that we'd all been talking about food deserts for a long time, because we really wanted to show that there were a lot of people who lived in these places where there were literally no grocery stores, no fresh fruit. It was a real problem. And of course, as we went to go talk to audiences like supermarkets that we wanted to go in there or corner stores, mostly people were like, oh my God, I really don't want to go there. It sounds terrible. Food desert sounds really terrible. And even when you talk to people in focus groups about, don't you think it's important that we handle these food deserts, and like, what do you think should happen around the food desert? And literally people were like, those people should move. And it was like, wow, this is like the sense of it. But part of the problem is it seems like a place that nobody should want to be. And that was the important thing for our framing. And we started a program down there and started talking about it differently, which is we started talking about how do you build a food oasis. Now, of course, lots more partners wanted to come to the table when we were talking about how to build a food oasis. And so this just changes and thinks about, and a lot of times I tell groups, try and think about if you're using deficit-based language or asset-based language, because generally people like to create things. They don't like to suffer through things. And that was a really important insight when we thought about the messaging around this campaign. So it's important for you all to think about, are you messaging this in a way that makes it really compelling for people to want to join your efforts? So let's take it to the next one. That is sometimes is really hard too, is trying to figure out how to talk about your issue in a really compelling way that's inclusive. This was around some of the issues around whether or not people had to actually sell wedding cakes in this case to gay people. And you started to see a lot of businesses putting up this messaging. And it was important because, one, it didn't get into the whole nuance of the argument. It didn't have to educate everybody about everything. It really went to the heart of what was the messaging for this, which is we don't discriminate. If you're buying, we're selling. And it actually sidesteps a lot of the politics around it. So trying to think about, are you able to talk about your issues, which are complicated and highly nuanced, in compelling, memorable, sticky ways is a really important thing. Take a look at the next video. It's really important too, as I'm talking about this asset and deficit and trying to think about how you're talking about things, is also how you're talking about people. So let's take a look at this video, and what's going to be surprising is how they present people, and the emotion that you're going to feel from this video is different than you have probably felt before. Let's take a look. All right. So that's a great example because I think a lot of the time when we're working with populations, we might talk about different people like vulnerable populations or other things. And what we're actually doing is we're doing a couple of things. We're making them victims, and a lot of times we might be triggering things like pity. Like a lot of times if you were to see something like that, you would sort of feel like, oh yeah, some people, they have issues, but they should get to play too, but it's a more like a pity thing. Instead, like this one, you really admire these folks, and you realize it's an extreme sport and that's much stronger than you are, and it just puts you in a completely different mindset. And so I want you to think about that, because a lot of times I think we go into kind of fear-based messaging or messaging that triggers more negative emotions than positive emotions, and we have a lack of engagement because of it. So really thinking about who you're working with and how you're talking about them is a really important thing in getting other people involved in the issues that you're working on. Let's take a look at the next one. I do always like to tell groups to think a little bit, if you have opposition going on your issues, is to make sure that you're not repeating the oppositional message point. So the best example I can remind you all of this is when sometimes people will talk about the Confederate flag, and when it needed to come down, people will talk about, well, it's not a racist symbol, it's this historical legacy. And even Obama would actually repeat that sometimes and say it belongs in a museum. But if, in fact, what you're talking about is race, then you should talk about it as race, and you shouldn't actually feed into those oppositional points. So for those of you that might have opposition out there, whether you're dealing with climate deniers or other things, it's really think about not using your oppositional language, even if it's in that kind of myth versus fact way, which is really you just spending your valuable communication time giving the other side's message point. So let's take a look at the next one. When you're thinking about your messaging, it is really important. While there's a number of activations that you can use, and I'll show you how to get to the activation point, which we'll go through a lot of them if you want to read it outside of this. But the biggest one is you absolutely have to make it personal. And there's 4 ways to make anything personal. The first is that it's actually personally relevant. That means it actually impacts me today. So if you're talking about my drinking water coming out of my faucet, that is personally relevant to me. The second is personally connected. And personally connected says, well, it may not be directly to me, but I know people there. So like I know people in Flint. So I am personally connected to that issue because I have people who live in Flint. The other is that you can make it a personal experience, and we've sort of seen that when people can go to community gardens or other things, like they start to see, or when you see kids actually go outside and play outdoors and how innovative and everything they are, that's some of the best messaging out there. So personal experience. And the last is a personal reward, that because I do something, I actually get a personal reward. And most of these rewards are not swag, although Beyonce tickets are probably always appreciated. But personal reward can be a lot of times like, I feel good about myself. And this is like why you guys all wear those I voted stickers all day after you voted. And that is not because you're actually encouraging other people. You're actually saying what a good person that you are. So those are the kinds of sort of rewards that you see. So let's take a look at this video that tried to make a complicated issue personally relevant to some students.
College sports in the U.S. have the NCAA.
Is that one not working? No, it's coming. Okay.
FIFA. College sports in the U.S. have the NCAA. Recently, the NCAA toughened its academic standards, making it harder for high school athletes to become college athletes, a change which will affect those who would benefit from a college scholarship the most, economically disadvantaged teens. If they don't graduate high school with the right grades, even the best athletes will spend their first year of college on the sidelines, putting their eligibility at risk. We had to let them know, if you don't get the grades, you'll get benched in college. And who better to hear that from than the bench himself?
You have to get the grades to get over this hurdle. Never judge a bench by its cover. It might be covered by your butt.
In just 3 months, the bench clocked over 25,000 followers on Twitter. But that was just the start.
I'll save you a seat.
He prodded them in high schools.
If you don't have the grades, we're gonna be like BFFs. Bench friends forever. What's worse than losing? Sitting.
And nudged them at home.
I can talk sit all day.
Then, with hidden cameras in hand, he surprised a group of unsuspecting high school athletes.
Bencher. Hit the bench, man.
Have a seat on the bench?
Hey! Yeah!
Who is this?
It's me, your worst nightmare. It's the bench. I said, get the hell off me! I hope you're better at passing tests than you are at passing that ball. You're gonna dunk the ball on that coach. Yeah, you are. And you can say, not in my house. Go ahead and yell that out. Not in my house.
Not in my house.
Real loud. Real
Not
loud.
in my house.
And stand up and yell it. Not in my house.
Not in my house.
And he got such a great response. He took his mission to the largest basketball event in the world and posted real time.
Rock, paper, scissors. See who wins this thing. 1, 2, 3, shoot!
Oh!
The bench reached an engagement level on Twitter 233% higher than the industry average.
I love me some Talking Bench.
By far the funniest thing I've seen. I'm about to be on Talking Bench next year if I don't get all this homework done.
And the campaign went viral. Having paid for just 800,000 impressions online, the campaign earned over 60 million. And best of all, traffic to the NCAA's eligibility information website increased by 730%. With a performance like that, it's no wonder the bench earned place in the Hall of Champions.
Hey, who's there? You better not be skipping school.
All right, so you can sort of see the power of creating an experience. Obviously, you don't have to make everything as fancy as all that. When we're able to have people have a personal experience, that's one of the most powerful ways to get messaging across. A couple more slides, and then we can open it up for questions. As you're thinking about activation, you do really want to think about your audiences and what their worldview is. More than anything, the recent brain science is suggesting to us that that really matters. So this is just a great example where we're trying to let people know that when kids find something, they will play with it. If you did finding something embarrassing and that you absolutely know that this could possibly happen in your house. Let's take a look at the next slide. Also for activation is to think about that mostly people, they move around in herds and tribes. Right now, you know, for a lot of environmental education folks, we're talking about how there's a lot of momentum within the states that they're getting in environmental education plans and other things because we're trying to show that a lot of other states are doing it and you want to do it because everybody else is doing it. And you sort of see that here in this Indiana example where they've been able to get more parents who use vouchers to use high quality childcare facilities by saying that most parents do this. So things like the social norm, things like making sure that if I think as a badge that I am a good parent, anything that you can do to reinforce what people's identity is for themselves and among the group that they identify with is always in what you're asking them to tribe. Is to really pay attention. You are making a high risk ask of them. And that's a much harder thing to do. They have to be a certain kind of person that likes to be first, and that is not everybody. So important to keep that in mind. Let's take a look at this next slide. You also want to really consider people's lifestyles so that when you're trying to get them to do something that you're interested in having them do, it should fit within what they might be doing anyways. And this is the funniest example I've seen recently. We had to get people to weigh in with the FCC, which is an agency that does not trip off the tongue, and almost nobody ever writes to the FCC. But we needed free and open internet.
Well, guess what? Now it's time to do some f***ing karate. For once in your life, we need you to channel that anger, that badly spelled bile that you normally reserve for unforgivable attacks on actresses you seem to think have put on weight, or politicians that you disagree with, or photos of your ex-girlfriend getting on with her life, or non-white actors being cast as fictional characters. And I'm talking to you, Ron Paul fan 2016, and you, One Direction forever, and I'm talking to you, One Direction sucks balls. We need you to get out there and for once in your lives, focus your indiscriminate rage in a useful direction. Seize your moments, my lovely trolls. Turn on caps lock and fly, my pretties.
Netted about 4 million comments into the government. So just a good example of you're not really asking them to do something that's outside their normal day, and that's generally a good way to activate people, is if you can fit it into their lifestyle. Let's take a look at the next slide. Where you can, you want to activate people. If you're interested in having them, for example, if we want to talk about all kids and the fact that all kids should benefit from environmental education, one of the most important things to do is to trigger empathy. When we are empathetic to people, we are much more likely to be fans of theirs and allies and support them. And you've seen this in all. We're doing very well in school, at great risk to them. Themselves in higher education, and they call them as, you know, really people that we admire. And that built a lot of empathy, and of course, we got many people to support that cause. So as you think about the issues that you're talking about and who you're talking, really think about, are you building empathy for them? Because it's one of the most powerful ways that if you're then going to ask people are empathetic towards. More slides. Once you sort of know exactly what you're doing, as he is the guy who runs a business and he is a chef, so he knows food. And having him talk on this issue was something very important. He was very powerful to a lot of the people that were involved in this debate. So you always need to think about, well, who is actually saying your message and how much credibility you have with the audiences that you're talking to. Let's go to the next slide. And once you know this is all your strategy, then you can focus on your tactics. And again, I would go back to some of these activation points that I've offered up here to say, when you're looking at your tactics, are you paying attention to hitting some of these activation points? So if you look at this one as a high value tactic, if I want to get more people to be concerned about out there, I can keep just about how many's been stolen, but I'm not really making it personal. And I told you that one of the most important things is to make it personal. Walk through, tell me where they're going to fit into their lifestyle, and then they're going to find out that they've probably already been hacked. So this is a high value tactic because it's going to allow me to check off several of those activation strategies I talked about. Which is going to make it more likely people hear this message and probably take the action that I'm interested in this case, an advocate. To see it on before showing you timing. So this, we didn't really know that Bernie Sanders was who he was, or that there would be, you know, burners, but there are basically three types of timing. One is expected timing. We can plan for it. Back to school is actually comes the same time every year. We can expect it. We know conversations that are going to be having it. And in fact, when you look at the EpiPen campaign effort, one of the reasons it did is because of its timing. All these parents are going back to school. They're all getting the EpiPen. So this is actually something you can plan around. Second is timing that you can create. And that can be creating a big family picnic. You can create good timing. You know, people regularly will make something World Day. You know, last week was, I think, National Adopt a Dog Day. So anything like that is you're creating good timing that allows you to then have conversations. So for those of you that were on Facebook last week, you probably saw like more dog do with. And the last is unexpected timing. And you don't know when it's going to come, but when it does come, you want to be able to move. So again, just going back to the EpiPen, a lot of people didn't know that that was going to get the traction that it got. But basically, any organization right now working on affordable health care should be using this window that just opened unexpectedly to push solutions or to get more people engaged in this effort. And so you don't always know when those would be, but you need to think about, well, what are they that then gives us an opportunity to have the conversations we want to have with the people we're interested in having them. So let me leave you with two tools here. The first is the Smart Chart, which you're allowed to download for free, and it really helps you. If you want to put a communication strategy together and you want to align it and you want to practice some of the things I just talked about, this is a great thing. It's online. You can also play with it online and actually type in your answers, and it will give you a. And then the second thing here is the activation point. And this is for those audiences that you actually want them to do something. So on the next slide, you can see that you can also pull down the activation point, and it's a great thing too. And then last is me, and you can follow me on Twitter. I regularly put up best practices. I never talk about what I've been eating. You'll be happy to know. So I just put up best practices and you know, good lessons out there in strategic communications that are good things for you to follow. So feel free to follow me if you're interested in some additional tips. And with that, I can open it up. Back.
Thanks. So great. And Grimm, you might not know that some people we're having our connection here, our hearing, you can be confident that the recording will be great. If anybody has any questions, please type them into the chat room, and Kristen will be able to respond. But boy, great tips, Kristen, for what we're all working on. It was fantastic. And I'm sorry if you can't even hear me now. Very quickly, Kristen, I think what we'll do is take the questions,
okay,
and then, you know, if maybe I'll ask if people can write them in since they can't hear, and we'll answer them online. How is that?
That sounds fine.
Does that sound good? So thank you so much. Does anybody have a question if you can hear this at all? We'll wait 1 or 2 quick seconds here to see if anybody's typing in. We have a couple of people typing. Somebody had sent me a question, Kristen, of what is the biggest issue you think environmental educators face with communications in your experience?
Yeah, I just think you don't get the love you probably should. You know, I think environmental education is one of those nice, fuzzy, nice to haves, and that people, it just hasn't received the same level of priority as some other things. So, you know, if you look at child obesity or bullying as like 2 examples of other issues that have just really risen in national prominence, I think environmental education, you know, hasn't had that real moment in the sun super recently, although the trend seems to be pointing more towards, as more people understand the stresses on our natural resources and how we as a society just have to value conservation and sustainability, that it does seem like it could be headed you know, in a better direction. And so I think it's interesting is to think about how to make it a must-have is just something that I know many of you have struggled with over the years. And I think that there's some real opportunities to gain greater traction on that with a more, you know, between climate and other things really starting to get the kind of attention that suddenly you realize environmental education is a serious part of the solution.
Thanks, Kristen. And I will will vouch for both of these. Art Chart and Activation Point are fantastic resources, so I really encourage you to download that. We have used that in so many training courses, and it's been so helpful to so many of our folks. Okay, so Kristen, thank you so much. A virtual clapping to thank you for all that you do for all of us in the social side and the environmental side to make the world a better place. You are fantastic. And just to end here today, thank you, Kristen. You can find a recording. It will be on EE Pro, and we'll send it out to everybody who signed up. We do have the monthly webinar series, and if you just look on EE Pro, you'll be able to see what's coming up next, what the dates are, and all of that. And we encourage you to sign up for a special discussion of strategic communications on ECentral on EE Pro. I'd also encourage you to follow Kristen on Twitter and also to look at her blogs. Really, really wonderful info for all of us. And again, the Madison Conference, today is the last day for early bird registration. We hope to see a lot of you in Madison. October 18th and 19th, and next month on September 28th, our own Sarah Boder will be talking about EE and the Every Student Succeeds Act, some new opportunities for everyone. And upcoming, we're going to have part 2 of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're going to hear from Esri in December. We're going to hear from Sean on climate and community resilience in January. So lots of good stuff coming up. Thank you all, and if you have any other questions, and we might have to upgrade our web connection if none of you could hear this very well, because it came through loud and clear here. So sorry about that, but thank you so much for joining, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you, and thank you again, Kristen. Fantastic job.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Bye, everyone.